The cemetery on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia, breathed with an old, uneasy silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind, the sort people imagine when they think of angels and rest, but a thick, watchful quiet, as if the ground itself was listening. Tall oak trees lined the narrow gravel road, their branches tangled with Spanish moss that swayed slowly in the late afternoon wind, brushing against cracked headstones like gray fingers. Richard Halston stepped out of his black luxury sedan and adjusted his cufflinks. The gesture was automatic, a reflex honed by decades of boardrooms, negotiations, and high-stakes meetings. His suit was custom-tailored, dark as polished obsidian, not a wrinkle in sight. Even here, among the dead, appearances mattered. He glanced at his watch. 6:07 p.m. 5 minutes, he said coldly, not looking at anyone in particular. Behind him stood Evan Miller, a thin 14-year-old boy hired by the cemetery caretaker for odd jobs. Evan clutched a metal lantern, its yellow light trembling as much as his hands. He had never been this deep in the cemetery before, especially not at dusk, especially not near the Halston family tomb. The tomb itself was massive, carved from pale marble, its surface etched with ivy and angels whose faces had softened with time. The name Elizabeth Halston was engraved in gold lettering, flawless and untouched, just like everything Richard insisted upon. She liked order, Richard muttered, staring at the stone. Clean lines. Silence. He hadn't visited in months. There was always another meeting, another flight, another deal that demanded his attention. Grief, like everything else, had been scheduled and minimized until it fit neatly into his life. Evan swallowed hard. Sir, I don't think we should be here. Richard finally turned. His eyes were sharp, calculating, the same eyes that had crushed competitors and intimidated city councils. Why not? Evan shifted his weight. I heard something earlier, when I was raking near the trees. Richard exhaled through his nose. This is a cemetery, son. Sounds echo. Animals dig. Your imagination is working overtime. No, sir, Evan insisted, voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't an animal. It sounded like a person. Richard's jaw tightened. There it was, that familiar irritation. The world, once again, refusing to behave according to plan. He had spent his life training himself to ignore distractions. Fear, emotion, noise. Those habits had saved him when he was young and hungry. They had made him rich. Listen carefully, Richard said, his tone firm but controlled. Nothing happens here without records. Permits. Staff. This tomb is sealed. End of discussion. Evan nodded, but his eyes kept darting toward the base of the structure. The wind picked up, rustling the moss overhead. Somewhere far away, a crow cawed. Richard turned back to the tomb, folding his hands behind his back, forcing himself into stillness. This was another habit. Stand your ground. Don't react. Don't flinch. Then it came. A sound, low, strained, unmistakably human. A groan. It rose from beneath the ground, vibrating through the soles of Richard's polished shoes and into his bones. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, like suffering pressed into sound. Evan gasped. There, sir, you heard it. Richard's heart skipped. Just once. Just enough. No, he said quickly, more to himself than to the boy. That's impossible. The sound came again, longer this time, ending in a broken wheeze. Richard felt something cold slide down his spine. For a moment, his mind raced for explanations, pipes, underground water pressure, old drainage tunnels. Anything but the truth standing right beneath him. His entire life had been built on rejecting uncomfortable realities until they went away. That habit had never failed him. Until now. Stay back, Richard ordered, stepping forward despite himself. He approached the tomb slowly. The closer he came, the more he noticed things he had ignored before. A thin crack running along the marble base, dark soil packed into the seams, footprints that didn't belong to the staff. This can't be right, he murmured. The ground shifted, just slightly. Evan screamed, Sir! The ground. Before Richard could respond, the earth buckled. Soil collapsed inward with a wet, heavy sound. The crack widened, stone grinding against stone like teeth. Richard stumbled back, his polished confidence dissolving into raw shock. Then a hand burst through the dirt. Not skeletal, not decayed, human. It clawed upward, fingers shaking, nails broken and blackened with soil. The hand grasped at air, then dug into the grass as if fighting the earth itself. Richard's breath caught in his throat. The lantern slipped from Evan's grasp and crashed to the ground, its light spinning wildly, throwing monstrous shadows across the tomb walls. The hand was followed by an arm, then a shoulder, and finally a man's head broke free from the soil with a choking gasp. The man coughed violently, dragging in air like someone surfacing from deep water. His face was smeared with mud, his hair matted, his eyes sunken but alive, terrifyingly alive. Richard backed away until his legs hit the sedan. His mind screamed run, but his body refused to move. This wasn't fear anymore. This was recognition. Somewhere deep inside, buried beneath decades of denial, a memory stirred. A report he hadn't read carefully. A name he had signed off as resolved. A problem he had trained himself not to hear. The man collapsed onto the grass, trembling, chest heaving. He lifted his head and looked straight at Richard Halston. And in that gaze, raw, accusing, unmistakable, Richard felt his habits crack for the first time in his life. "Please," the man whispered hoarsely. "Don't let them bury me again." The cemetery fell silent. Richard Halston felt his knees weaken. For a split second, the powerful businessman, who had stared down hostile takeovers and courtroom threats without blinking, couldn't even breathe. The cemetery lights flickered on automatically as dusk surrendered to night, bathing the scene in a pale, unforgiving glow. Evan was the first to move. "Oh my God, you're alive," the boy whispered, dropping beside the man. "Sir, he's really alive." The man coughed again, his body racked with pain. Dirt spilled from his mouth as he struggled to speak. His voice was hoarse, scraped raw by time and silence. They said I was dead," he gasped. "But I wasn't." Richard's ears rang. His mind tried, desperately, to build walls. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But every shuddering breath from the man on the ground tore another brick away. "What's your name?" Evan asked gently. The man swallowed. Daniel Brooks." The name hit Richard like a blow to the chest. 20 years vanished in an instant. Atlanta. A half-finished underground parking structure. A warning report stamped urgent. A foreman's voice. "Sir, we should stop work until we check for survivors." And Richard's reply, cold, efficient, habitual. "Delays cost money. We've done enough." "No," Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. Daniel turned his head toward him. Even through the mud and blood, recognition flickered in his eyes. "You," Daniel rasped. "You're him." Richard took an unsteady step forward. "That's impossible. You were declared dead." Daniel let out a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "Yeah, that's what the papers said. That's what made it easier for everyone to forget." Evan looked between them, confused and frightened. "Sir, you know him?" Richard didn't answer. He knelt down, slowly, painfully, as if gravity had suddenly increased. The ground felt colder than stone beneath his knees. "I thought," Richard said, swallowing hard, "I thought there were no survivors." Daniel's eyes burned. "Because you didn't want there to be." Silence crashed down on them. The habit of control, Richard's lifelong armor, tried one last time to save him. He could call security, spin a story, pay someone off, make this disappear like he had made so many problems disappear before. But something was different now. Daniel wasn't buried in paperwork. He was here, breathing, bleeding, alive. Evan's voice cut through the moment. "Sir, we need to call an ambulance. He's not okay." Richard looked at his phone. For the first time in his life, his hand shook. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "Yes, call them." Evan fumbled for his phone, fingers flying as he dialed 911. In the distance, thunder rolled softly, as if the sky itself was reacting to what had been unearthed. Daniel grabbed Richard's sleeve with surprising strength. "Promise me something," he said. Richard met his eyes. "Anything. Don't let them cover this up." "Not again." Richard nodded, tears burning his eyes. "I won't." Sirens wailed in the distance, first faint, then louder, cutting through the night like judgment drawing near. As flashing red and blue lights spilled across the gravestones, Richard stayed kneeling in the dirt. He ignored the mud staining his suit, the cold biting into his legs, the cameras beginning to gather beyond the gates. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about consequences. He was thinking about habits. How ignoring warning signs had once saved him time. How silencing fear had made him rich. And how those same habits had nearly buried a man alive. The paramedics lifted Daniel onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him away, Daniel reached out once more. "Thank you," he whispered, not with gratitude, but with relief. Richard watched the ambulance disappear into the night, his chest heavy with a truth he could no longer outrun.